Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome NATCA's Executive Vice President, Trish Gilbert.
Doesn't look like 1,500 people. Are we missing anybody? I trust that everybody had a great day yesterday, had a good, healthy dinner last night, got to bed early and slept well and prepared for today. I'm sure of it. I got a couple housekeeping items before we bring up our first speaker. If you didn't get your daily dispatch, please get it. There is some new and exciting articles on there from yesterday. Our staff works very hard to put this out and make it very real and right on the spot with what we're doing daily. Don't forget to go to the NATCA Charitable Foundation silent auction. If you haven't put in your bids for all the great items that they have, please do so. I did want to announce we just received a donation from the National Hispanic Coalition, donated some funds to the NATCA Charitable Foundation, so thank them for that. And please spend some time with the exhibitors. They have spent a lot of time and they have staff here to answer your questions and get to know you a little bit. So spend some time with the exhibitors. So with that, it is my pleasure and honor to bring up our first speaker of the day. He's a commercial multi-engine instrument-rated pilot. He holds a law degree from Harvard and a bachelor's and master's in aerospace engineering from Princeton. He was appointed to the National Transportation Safety Board in August of 2009 and appointed as Vice Chairman by President Obama, where he served 3 consecutive terms. He has been nominated by President Obama now to serve as Chairman of the NTSB, and he's been acting in that role since August of 2014. Last year, and he's still waiting confirmation by the Senate. So hopefully they'll get to that very, very quickly because we need him in place. But before being appointed to the NTSB, he served as Deputy Director for Air Traffic Safety Oversight at the FAA and as FAA Assistant Administrator for System Safety. He has worked as Deputy Administrator for the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, and NATCA has enjoyed working with him both at the NTSB and when he was at FAA. Please join me in welcoming Chairman Hart.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for inviting me to speak at your conference. It's a privilege and an honor, and it's an up-close privilege and an honor because, as you heard Trish say, I'm a pilot, and every time I fly, I take wonder at the great work that you men and women do in controlling air traffic. So thank you for the opportunity to be here. I brought my special assistant, Vishal Amin, who's also a controller formerly at Memphis Center and Washington Center, so I guess you could say some of my best friends are controllers. So I wanted to talk about a few issues of interest to everyone. First, NTSB 101, just because most of you probably know what we do, but I'll just sort of a high-level overview. But I want to talk about a few operational issues of concern today, and then I want to talk about sort of an overarching issue that I haven't seen yet cross my desk as far as air traffic is concerned, which means I haven't seen any accidents or incidents resulting from it, but I see it looming over the horizon, and that's increasing automation. So I'd like to talk about all of those, and I know I'm on a short fuse time-wise, but I warned them I'm an attorney, and that means my #1 credo is never use one word when 2 will suffice, but I'll try to get us out of here. Before I begin, though, I've already expressed kudos to just the work you men and women do every day that I see as a pilot, but especially because of what happened in Chicago. That was such an amazing event of people coming together, the people on scene, the people off scene, coming together to respond to that tragic event and bring the system back up and running as quickly as possible. The collaboration between the controllers, the tech ops, everybody, the pilots, everybody involved was truly amazing, and kudos to you guys for such a wonderful show of professionalism for how you pulled that together, again, not only on-site but off-site, because it affected, the domino effects of that were felt across the country and affected pretty much all of you in one way or another, and you all came together and really pulled it together. So kudos to you for such great work. We're fortunate in this country to have such a wonderful cast of controllers. So let me talk briefly about what the NTSB does. We're an independent federal agency that was created to investigate when something goes wrong in transportation, and we determine what caused it, and then we make recommendations to try to prevent it from happening again. The media would have you think that because it's just a recommendation, we're not a regulator, we can't require anything. The media would have you think that when people receive this from us, oh, it's just a recommendation, file 13. But actually, you know what happens more than 80% of the time? They do it. And that's why it's a privilege and an honor for me to be there, because the fact that people do that more than 80% of the time, even though they don't have to, is such a tribute, first to our accident investigators who do such world-class investigations to find out what went wrong, and second, to our analysts who take what the investigators find and shape it into recommendations so that when someone gets a recommendation, they say, this is a very good idea, and more than 80% of the time they do it. So they do all the work, I get the credit. What's not to like? So that's why it's such a privilege for me to be there. And our single focus is safety. Congress created us to provide the input in an ideal safety world if safety were your only consideration, and of course it never is your only consideration, but to provide the input in an ideal safety world where safety were your only consideration. So as I said, our primary product is recommendations, and we issue them to whoever has the authority to fix whatever the problem is. And again, as I said, the response is more than 80% acceptable. So that's NTSB 101 in a nutshell. Let me move to 3 immediate operational issues that we're working on in various stages of completion, and what I'll be emphasizing all through these is the way we're going to work on these with collaboration, with the controllers, with the pilots, with the regulator, with the investigator, all of us working together, the industry working together to solve these problems. Converging runway operations, usually a problem when you have not necessarily intersecting runways, but intersecting flight paths from runways. So the typical scenario is there's an arrival going on one or more runways and departure on a runway where the flight paths intersect, and then the arrival does a go around and then conflicts with the departure. So that's the typical scenario, starting with right here. Air carrier go around on runway 25 left. That would be the bottom one on the slide. Learjet departing on 19 left. That would be the vertical ones, the one on the right side of the vertical ones. And so they conflicted, and separation 0.3 nautical miles and 100 feet. Pretty scary stuff in our book, pretty scary stuff in anybody's book. Charlotte, RJ was going around on runway 23, the one that's crossing the other runways, air carrier taking off on runway 18C, the one in the center, and then they conflicted less than 400 feet laterally and 100 feet vertically. JFK, air carrier go around on 22 left, that's the bottom one on the picture, departing on 13 right, which is the one on the left side of the slide. And then they conflicted because they had an arrival departure window procedure that was in effect, and the idea is the window tells you when a departure is safe based on where the arrivals are located, but that procedure wasn't followed and again created a very scary near miss. So our concern is when these things happen, it's kind of like who's in charge here, because ATC is not responsible, you guys aren't responsible for the separation, but by the same token, the pilots can't really see each other when they're turning away from each other. The bank angle means that they're not able to see each other, and their TCAS is often disabled in that environment intentionally so that it won't just keep going off because you're always close to airplanes. Then you add to that the surprise of, all of a sudden we got to go around, and this is at a very busy phase and a very critical phase of the flight. And then plus you're challenging when you do, at those speeds, when you do, it doesn't take much of a bank angle and very much in terms of pulling G's to be reaching the performance envelope of the airplane. So that's a scary situation for us, and we need to continue the collaborative work to try to figure that out. FAA has been doing lots of things to address these and found many similar events when they dug into their data. So there's a group that's been formed to mitigate this significant safety risk, and it's a collaborative effort. And again, I keep stressing collaboration because it's a complex system of connected subsystems, and because the subsystems are connected, then any change you make in one subsystem will have effects throughout other subsystems in that system, and that's why you need collaboration, because all of those systems need to work together to solve the problem. Wrong airport landings. This typically occurs at night because it relates to, usually if it's daytime, you can generally tell enough from the environment, oops, that's the wrong place, but if it's night and the runway has a similar geometry, similar length to width ratio, then based it on the lights, it's easy to mistake a runway if it's got the same orientation as the runway you're headed for. So we see all too many of those, and 2 most recent ones occurred within a couple of months of each other when a 747 Dreamlifter landed near Wichita, an airport, Jabara Airport, about 9 miles north of Wichita. And this 747, it's the big one that with a huge expanded body that's used to carry airplane fuselages from one plant to another. And you've seen pictures of this huge thing, and the runway was only 6,100 feet, and this 747 managed to stop on that runway at night. So, you know, thanks for their ability to be able to stop it in such a short distance under the situation. Branson, Missouri, 737, landed at a nearby airport 7 miles north, and in that case, also at night, in that case, the runway was less than 4,000 feet, and he managed to stop. Now that was amazing. We issued a safety alert regarding wrong runway landings because as we saw these two in a short period of time, we became concerned, is this a problem we need to pay more attention to? And we are now working on it and plan to issue some recommendations on it fairly soon. So let me show you the picture at Branson if there had been an overrun. Now, it's hard to tell from that picture, but you can sort of see from the shadows of the trees and the size of the interstate going by there that there is a significant drop-off at the end of that runway. So if that airplane had overrun that runway, I can guarantee you there would have been a much more tragic situation than what we saw when they were able to stop in less than 4,000 feet. So this is an issue of significant concern to us. Lightning data. Lightning data is not presently displayed to controllers, but we know that lightning is a strong indicator that there's severe turbulence as opposed to just lots of heavy rain. I've been in situations myself where I was flying through very, very heavy rain, and it looked to the controllers to be bad enough to be a thunderstorm, but it wasn't really a thunderstorm. It was nice and calm, and the controllers were all concerned. What are you doing there? I mean, I'm in a little single-engine Piper. What are you doing there? But it was nice and smooth. It was just a whole lot of water. But if there had been, I assure you, I would not have been there if there had been convective activity, but they can't tell that. But with lightning, that gives them a much better picture to see where there's major convective activity, because you know if there's lightning, then it's going to be very turbulent. So two things. One is that would show them where the lightning is. Two is that would show them where the lightning isn't, and that would help with efficiency of operation. So we made some recommendations to the FAA about real-time lightning data for controllers and also in the cockpit to have better information in the cockpit. The FAA formed a group to look at this issue and came up with quite a few concerns about it, and many of those concerns were quite valid. So we're exploring those concerns as we speak and looking to resolve the issues. Again, we all have our eyes on the same prize, so the media would have the picture that it's NTSB versus FAA, but we're all working in the same direction. I don't see it as NTSB versus FAA. I see it as we stand in different postures, and that was intentional, and that helps to create a better result for the entire picture. So those are three current operational issues that we're dealing with and we need to address sooner rather than later. I'm going to move to one that we've seen a lot in flight ops, but I haven't seen that much of it yet in ATC. And when I say I haven't seen much of it, what that means is I haven't seen any accidents or incidents that are tied to these two issues. The two issues are both related to automation. When it goes wrong, then there's an increasing likelihood that because the systems are getting ever more complex, that the operator of the system, in this case we're talking mostly pilots, may not really know how to respond to this malfunction. Not only that, but as the systems get more and more reliable, and that's obviously a very good thing, that as the systems get more and more reliable, there's an increasing likelihood that the pilot has never seen this malfunction before, even in training. So now I'm seeing it for the first time in real life, and now what do I do? And if the skills have eroded because of so much automation that you're not using those skills as much, then there's real heavy question about whether that pilot is going to be able to respond in the moment as needed. So that's when things aren't working. I'll give a few examples of that. Now here's the other side of the coin is, can we have too much of a good thing so that when things are working so well, maybe that undermines professionalism? So let me give you an example of that in a minute, because this is one that I have not even seen literature on yet, but I'm concerned about it because I'm seeing it in some of the other modes that we deal with. As I mentioned, we deal with all the modes of transportation, and I'm starting to see this already in some of the other modes that are even more automated than we are. So let's talk about some of the situations where things went wrong. These are several examples. I'm just going to talk mostly about one of them, Rio to Paris. That was Air France Flight 447. And that one was one where they were 370 over the ocean in thunderstorm, night, IMC, lots of turbulence, and then the pitot tubes froze over, which caused them to lose their airspeed information. So when they lose their airspeed information, first of all, the autopilot stops because it needs airspeed to work, but about 6 or 8 other systems that need airspeed also died because they lost the airspeed information. So here's a situation where it's very complex automation. The pilots didn't really understand the totality of the system and had never seen this failure before. They'd never, even in training, they'd never had loss of airspeed in cruise. So now they got a bunch of error messages, and it doesn't say you lost your airspeed and therefore you lost these other 6 or 8 systems that depend on airspeed. It just had a bunch of error messages. So in the moment, they couldn't tell that cause and effect, because if you know cause is loss of airspeed in cruise, then pilots are trained, okay, you lose your airspeed, that's easy, pitch and power, and you'll be fine, okay? So they couldn't make that connection because they didn't have the information to let them know cause, loss of airspeed, effect, loss of all these other systems. So all of a sudden, right now, your airplane, okay, so here they are, fat, dumb, and happy, feet up on the footrest, and all of a sudden, your airplane, at night, in thunderstorm, turbulence, coffin corner, all the bad things, just a perfect storm of things gone wrong, and they responded inappropriately. So this is just a poster child for what can happen as automation gets more and more complex. And my concern is that wasn't just 2 guys that had a bad night in an Airbus. This is a very generic problem for the entire system. And so, of course, now, let me add one more thing to this. The fact that they hadn't seen this even in training, they also never flew the airplane manually before, even in training. And the reason they hadn't flown it manually before is because when they reduced the minimum vertical separation from 2,000 feet to 1,000 feet, they said, I don't trust human beings to do that reliably, so therefore you are required to fly with automation when you're above whatever the altitude is. In most of the US, it's 290. So anything above that, you got to be on automation. So they had never flown this airplane manually before. So all of a sudden, your airplane, and they're doing it manually, shock effect, total surprise, and they responded inappropriately. So that's just sort of a poster child for what can go wrong in these complicated automatic systems. Now let's look at the other side of the coin and ask, is it possible to have too much? So I'm going to use, for the example for that, many of the subway systems around the country. The design objective for many of those systems is to make the system as automated as possible, on the theory that the more you take the human out of the loop, the less likelihood you are to have human error. So they want to make it as automated as possible. So the train leaves the station with automation. It maintains speed limits. It avoids hitting other trains. It stops in the station, and it opens the doors. And the operator does one thing. The operator closes the doors. So imagine I'm one of those operators, and I go home to my kids and I brag, boy, I'm the best door closer they ever had. So I'm thinking, now where's the professionalism in that? Is this person who comes to work just to close the doors, do they love what they do? Are they passionate about what they do? Are they really going to be professional about it? Or are they just there for a paycheck? And if they're just there for a paycheck, what does that do to the professionalism? I have real concerns about that. I haven't seen that yet in aviation because we aren't that automated yet in aviation, but I see it looming over the horizon, and this is something we need to keep our eye on as we're increasing the automation, because make no mistake about it, automation has done great things in a lot of ways. So I'm not anti-automation at all. I'm just saying that we have a long way to go to understand the human-automation interface and how to make that work better. So again, the good news is I haven't seen this yet in an ATC application, but I hope that we can learn the lessons from flight ops so that we will avoid some of these problems in ATC operations as it gets more automated that we encountered and are still struggling with in flight ops. So thanks again for the opportunity to be here. We've come a long, long way, but as we know, it's a journey, not a destination, and so we'll always have a ways to go. New technologies are often great, but when these complex systems occur and you make a change in one subsystem, and as they're coupled together, what is the effect of that change in that subsystem on all the other subsystems? That's a real challenge, so that when we introduce new technologies to solve a problem, we may introduce new problems. So the best way to address this complexity is to do it as your industry is doing it, through CAS, Commercial Aviation Safety Team, doing it with a collaborative approach, bringing together everybody who's got a dog in the fight. The moral is very simple. The moral is if you're involved in the problem, you need to be involved in the solution. So thanks again for the opportunity to be here, and if I have time, I'd be happy to take any questions you might have. Thank you.
So we certainly have time, Chairman Hart. If anybody in the audience has questions, we have the mics out in the aisles just like yesterday.
Either I covered it very, very well, or you're just still sleepy because it's too early in the morning.
It's a good opportunity. I think we have one coming up here.
Yes, please.
On the left.
There's an old YouTube video from American Airlines called Children of the Magenta that talks about automation dependency, and this was before RNAV, arrivals and departures and everything. And it seems like we're dealing with a lot of these same problems 10 years on, and I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about, how do you reduce workload in a high, in doing these complex arrivals and departures, and is there room to hand fly? Does that make it easier at all, or does that just make it worse?
That's a good question, and I would go back to the theme that I've been expressing, which is collaboration, because in these complex systems of subsystems that are coupled together and you make changes in one and you need to know what that does to the other subsystems, the only way to really understand that, absent a really, really, really smart person who understands the totality of the system and how the subsystems interact, the only way to really do that is to bring together all the players who have a dog in the fight. So, for example, when things are, I often see things are introduced in your world that apparently, from what I can tell from a distance, the people who are hands-on operators of it weren't adequately involved in the design of that system, and it was just plopped on them and said, here, you use this system. To me, if the people who use the system aren't involved in the design of the system, then there's a disconnect right away. That's why the airplane manufacturers bring pilots in from early on. Thank you very much. The airplane manufacturers bring pilots in early on because they're the end users of the system, and they know that if this goes out the hangar and the pilots don't like it, then there's a problem. So bring the pilots in early on so that they can be involved in the design of the system. Here's something else that the aircraft manufacturers do. I don't know if you knew this, but they also bring in the maintenance community because they know this thing has to be maintainable. It has to last for 40 or 50 years to be economically viable, so they bring the maintenance community in, but they also bring the air traffic control community, because if you guys ask them to do things that their automatic system can't easily do, and they're going to be, heads inside the cockpit making all kinds of changes because of the things that you typically ask them to do, then right there is a disconnect between the way the airplane works and the way the system works. And so they bring in air traffic controller. So I would say the same thing about air traffic control equipment. We have to have the end users involved in the design, because they're the ones, if it doesn't work for them, it doesn't work, and that's the bottom line. So I would say collaboration, and make sure that everybody who's got a dog in the fight, if you're involved in the problem, you need to be involved in the solution. Thank you for the question. Next question, please.
You spoke about the Rio to Paris flight. Has there been any changes in the FMS where pilot will get an indication where this is the cause, and I'm giving you these warnings? Has there been a change?
That's a good question. There have been quite a few changes as a result of that accident. For example, I'll bet you that a lot of people are flying manually at cruise altitude in training now, which they never did before. Okay, now that was, and since it's illegal to do that, I'm not surprised that, so I'm not being critical that there wasn't training about that, but I'm saying we realize now maybe we better be trained for that situation. In terms of the specifics of the software and how it works, I can't give you a specific answer to that, but I can tell you that the two major companies I'm talking about in the U.S., the big airplane builders, Boeing and Airbus, they're both very conscientious about those kinds of issues and are trying to address the human factors issues as best they can. And so I would assume there has been a fix for that. I can't tell you exactly what the fix is. Thank you for the question.
We have another question over on the right.
So I just want to preface this with the fact that I'm not a pilot, but when I studied the Air France crash, it seemed to be that it was a very basic pilot skills would have been able to recover from that, that basically they went into too steep a climb and stalled the airplane. The question I have is, as we apply the same kind of automation technologies to SIDS installers for air traffic control, I see controllers' skills degrading over time as they don't vector as much, don't apply speed controls, things like that. So my question is there any dialogue as to implementing some kind of special training so that we can keep our skills up when that automation fails?
Well, that's a very good question, and I would not be quick to say that the pilots mishandled it, because in hindsight, we know what the problem was. We know the problem was they lost their airspeed, and therefore those other systems failed. They weren't able to tell that based on this display of a bunch of error messages. I don't even remember whether the lost airspeed was the first error message, but the point is they weren't able to make that connection of cause and effect. But to your underlying point, certainly the developers of automation need to be conscientious about how to make sure that the people who are using this automation are able to, A, recognize that there's a problem when a problem arises, and B, in the loop enough to be able to recover from the problem successfully without Herculean effort. So that's a huge challenge of automation, and that's why I say we all have a challenge of understanding the human-automation interface much better, because we are assured that things are going to get more automated, but we have to look at whether that regimen should include some intentional manual use in order to keep you from having your skills degrade, because that's one of the huge problems with more automation, is that skills degrade. I guarantee you that when I got a backup warning in my car, it took me about a week not to be able to judge the distance behind me and when I'm backing up. So when I'm in my other car that doesn't have a backup warning, thunk, oops, because now, all of a sudden, because I have a backup warning in my car, I lost that skill that fast. And so that's amazing how quickly that can work when people have, it's the same thing with anti-lock brakes. When people have anti-lock brakes, it was amazing what it did in terms of now their ability to do it the right way. So automation is a big challenge, and it's not just the automation, it's the totality of the situation. It's looking at, okay, it's illegal to fly manually above 290, but does that mean we shouldn't have people doing this in the training, because they might encounter a need to do that in the real world? And it's a very different airplane. It operates, to those of you who are pilots, it flies very differently at 370 than it does when you're taking off and landing. So that's the totality of automation, is to look at the complete picture, the big picture, and not just let's automate it because we can do it.
All right, we have time for one more question over on the left.
Thank you. I didn't hear you mention anything about surface events, specifically runway crossings, and what the future holds for that with ADSB and Datacom in the future, and all these sits and stars where the heads are down quite a bit in the cockpit while they're taxiing. I didn't know if that's still a concern in the NTSB or not.
Thank you for the question. It's very much of a concern. The reason I raised these three that I raised is because not only are they a concern, but they're a concern that are very likely to kill people when something goes wrong. The surface events where they're, the wingtip hits something while they're taxiing or something aren't as likely, but certainly we are looking at that. I mean, for example, we had the recommendation about when you're cleared to a runway, you got to be cleared specifically to cross each runway that you're going to cross, things like that. So it is very much on our radar. I just raised these three because they are issues that have a huge potential to kill people, as you saw from that Branson. If they had gone off the end of that, that would have been a horrible event.
All right. Thank you, Chairman Hart. We appreciate your time, taking time out of your busy schedule and speaking to us today. Please join me in thanking Chairman.
Thank you very much for having me.